I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hey guys, real quick, before we jump into the podcast, I wanted to announce the winners of the podcast t-shirts from last week. We asked you to go to Facebook and comment on the post, and the first winner is going to be Josh. Josh said, Preston, you have to be my brother from another mother. If I had $1 for every time I shared with someone a build and heard that won't work or you can't do that, people, I tell you, they have no imagination. I love listening to you guys. You have confirmed some of my findings on the traditional dogmas of reloading being false. Plus, because of your podcast, I am jumping into PRS this year. Keep it up. Well, thanks for writing in, Josh, and we'll be in touch to get you your limited edition Hornady podcast shirt. And the last giveaway winner is going to be Levi. Levi says, the Howa mini action in 6mm arc is like the sleeper build of the gun world. Compact, unassuming, and humble, but when you pull the trigger or squeeze it, it absolutely rips. The 6 arc packs a serious punch against many animals. And now I need one. The restraining order my wallet was about to file against me just might be delayed due to the lower cost of entry compared to a custom action. Well, I hope you enjoy the build, Levi, and we'll reach out to you and get your podcast t-shirt sent out to you. For now, guys, tune into this episode, find out your way to win one of the limited edition Hornady podcast shirts, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. This is the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I'm joined today right here in the studio, 2 engineering types. I've got Miles Neville. I've got Ryan Damon. Guys, thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning.
Glad to be here.
Now, you guys, engineering types, have a little bit in common, and that is bullets. Ryan, as far as engineering prowess goes, you've obviously proven yourself, been on the show many times talking about bullet design and the engineering hurdles that you've had to jump. You've since moved into cartridge case engineering, but you still dabble in the bullets. And Miles, that is your primary focus for Hornady is bullet engineering and the design. And I feel like there's a lot of people that don't necessarily appreciate what goes into making a bullet and the draw process of taking a strip of copper, turning it into a cup, and then taking that cup through a draw process until it looks like a bullet, let alone shoots accurately or has terminal performance. I mean, just comes off the press looking like a bullet. So I bring you guys on for a special episode that I think will help dispel some misunderstandings specifically about our ELD-X bullet. So I'm going to be tapping into your engineering minds. But before I do, I want to make a quick announcement to the listener about those podcast t-shirts. It was an awesome, resounding success. We got some amazing comments. We're announcing the winners. Got some good comments, and that was through Facebook. For this week, we're going to change it up a little bit. We're going to pick the best YouTube comments. So if you drop us a comment here on YouTube and you think it's t-shirt worthy, there's one extra step. Drop that comment in the YouTubes and then email us, podcast@hornady.com, your podcast. That way we have a direct line of communication with you where we can get your address to send the shirt. But we really love the interaction, especially on the 6.5 versus 6.5 podcast, because that one was controversial, to say the least. Ryan, you were on that one. Before we get started on today's topic, I got to hear Miles' take on it. 6.5 Creedmoor versus the 6.5 PRC. Do you have a favorite and why, or why would you choose one over the other?
Creedmoor.
Okay.
Barrel life.
That's it.
Carbon fouling.
Oh, yep.
Powder usage, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a speed demon. The 200 foot per second, I'll put a longer barrel on if I want that.
That's a fair answer.
But yeah, and then Creedmoor will get it done.
Yeah.
Anything I want to do, Creedmoor will get it done inside of 200-300 yards.
Yeah. Very nonchalant with your answer.
Yeah, but for big game, it'll get it done. And then for target shooting, it's...
The barrel life in your world of target shooting, increasingly more important. One, with the worldwide powder shortage and finding some of those really premium Magnum burn speed powders. You know, I was just at Cabela's this weekend. They had a bunch of H1000, no Retumbo.
You bought it all.
Nothing out of the Reloader series. No, I did not. But it was $70 a pound. It's like, woof.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten worse.
Yep. So jump over to 4350. They had 2 8-pounders and like 10 1-pounders. Still $70 a pound, but it was there. And in a Creedmoor, you're only cooking off 40 grains of powder, 41 grains of powder versus, mid 50, 60 grains of powder in a PRC. So that's a good answer. All right. So jumping into today's topic of these ELD-X and these bullet weights. I get this question quite a bit. I'm sure we all have of why does a bullet weigh that? Well, I don't understand, how that weight came to be. Why isn't it heavier? Why is it an odd number? Why is it a 143, not a 144, a 145, or a 140? And why is it not a 150 something to pick on the 6.5? We get that question a lot, and I've got it enough that I thought, you know what? We should do a podcast on it because it's nuanced and there are actual reasons. Now, some of it, which I'm excited to hear, Ryan, some of it may have just been you with your personal bias of, I like this number, so we're going with this one. But there's also other reasons, and I think those reasons are necessary. So for the listener, if you want the full deep dive on the ELD-X bullet, you need to go all the way back to episode number 87. And we had senior ballistics scientist Dave Emery. We drove him up here, verbally beat him up a little bit on these podcasts, and we dive deep into the initial design, discovery of the heat shield tip, discovery of the aerodynamic heating and how we solved that, and then the ELD-X and ELD-Match bullet story. And that's back in episode 87. Fast forward a little bit to episode 145. Now, on episode 145, we looked at our CX bullet, our really popular monolithic, and we juxtaposed that with the ELD-X and why you would pick one over the other. Because that's another really common question that we get. These CXs sound a lot lighter. I want a heavier bullet. Does that mentality hold true? And as it turns out, it doesn't. But we talked through picking one over the other. So for this episode, I'd like to take a look at specifically those ELD-X bullets and how a ELD-X bullet weight comes to be. Obviously, looking forward, there'll be some new design elements, as there always are. But with our original launch, when we had those ELD-Xs, when we first launched them in 2015, 2016, I'd really like to see what that looks like and why that came to be. So let's take a trip in the time machine and go back to that first, okay, we've got the heat shield tip figured out. How can we make this, kind of all-range hunting bullet? Ryan, what were some of the first ones that you worked on, and how did those weights, and what was the discussion on how heavy do these bullets need to be?
So the first couple projectiles that were going to be in this line before ELD-X was a name, it was just we needed extended range hunting bullet, and the first ones were going to be a 300 Win Mag and 7 mag bullets.
Of course, the
so
standards.
They're going to be driven through what cartridges are going to be loaded in factory ammo.
Okay.
And so we looked at what do we already make for bullet weights, because we generally try to avoid having duplicates of bullet weights just for manufacturing in the same plant, and it's a lot easier to get stuff mixed up if they
weigh the
exact same, if they're identical. So
same thing for the customer too.
Yeah.
Easy enough to
see
the wrong label, same number, wrong label.
So the very first one was a 30 cal 200 grain bullet. That was the first one we spent most of the time on figuring out the tip stuff and figuring out just the jacket profile and lead cavity around the tip, what tip we're using.
And a sign of the times, it was mid 2000s, late, early teens, 300 Win Mag. You could buy, the Remington 700 Sendero at the time had a really big following. And if you were trying to have an all-range hunting system, that was a factory off-the-shelf rifle that a lot of people liked. And then in the custom world, obviously the Win Mag just historied, to say the least. So, okay, you targeted, we need a 300 Win Mag projectile, and that brings along with it some stipulations.
Yeah, so you're limited right off the bat. If you're picking popular cartridge, you got to support that cartridge. You're limited by twist rate and chamber design, which drives your head height of your projectile.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever that amount of ogive or amount of bullet sticking above the case mouth, your head height. So that's a SAMI standard that it's a constraint on your design.
Yeah, you have to make it fit.
You got to fit.
Function.
It's got to fit in a magazine. It's got a chamber.
Mm-hmm.
So right there, you're limited with how ballistically sleek you can make that thing. But okay, that's your limit. You make it as best you can. And it was a new ogive at the time. We got a new tip, all that's new. And 200 grains was just right in that sweet spot of what is this cartridge going to drive this bullet out of the muzzle? What velocities is it going to see? And what velocities is that going to see downrange? So we know those have a sweet spot, but we also know if those are going to expand down to 1,600 feet per second, where is that going to put me downrange, yardage-wise? So all those come into play of, do we want to make a oddball weight bullet or a nice 200 grain bullet? That was this agreed upon, and we just ran with that. And then with that, once we get the design figured out, okay, we're expanding this line, we need an initial offering. We did 3 30 cals right off the bat. Okay, we got 300 Win Mag, but we're going to need something heavier because there's going to be Ultra Mags.
And there's going to be custom chambers.
There's going to be custom chambers. You got to give guys a different option, something heavier.
Okay.
So that's where the 220 came in. It's the identical ogive as 200. Is same boat tail. It's same jacket profile per length inside that jacket. It's just stretched out from the 200.
Okay.
So that's where those two came from.
But you're still going to stabilize in that standard 10 twist.
Yeah, 10 twist.
And it's still going to work in the head heights that's allowed in, like, say, a 300 drum.
Yep.
Okay, so that one was basically just fill it up, make this thing as big as we can, and still stabilize in a 10 twist.
Another thing that spools into is manufacturability, and what we get a bullet really long, it's harder to make. You got to need more jacket material. How we make our jackets out of cups, that comes into play too, because we try to minimize new cups that we have in our plant. We already have a lot.
Yeah.
And so every time you add another item number that we got to stock on the shelf, it's like, well, is it worth it for one SKU moving forward, or can we make a new cup, and is it going to be used in 10 bullets down the road? So that comes into play. That's a decision we got to make. So that basically is a limit on how long we can get a bullet, how big, how much material you got to pack in that jacket.
Yep.
And then with the 30 at the same time, we needed 308 Winchester. You got to have one.
Never heard of it. Is it going to catch on? Yeah.
We'll see if it lasts.
Yeah. The 308 Winchester, you have to have. I mean, that, as far as hunting goes, that is one of the more do-all cartridges out there. So you have to pick one for the 308 Winchester, but you still want to go heavy for caliber. Talk to us real quick about, like, you picked this one as a 178. One, how that ended up being 178, but what's the purpose of going heavier for caliber? Obviously not so heavy, but heavier than, say, your traditional
generally,
stuff.
and you'll see that across all these, we're heavy on the heavy end for caliber just because we want to be able to kind of limit muzzle velocity capabilities. These bullets don't need to be stood on as hard as possible. I mean, so out of a 308, we know you're not going to be launching that thing faster than you should, just because there are some compromises with those bullets design if you're going to be impacting
50 yards,
60 yards impacts on game, because of it's got to be able to expand at 600, 700, 800 yards also.
Right.
So the 178 was, again, a package. How does it fit in that cartridge? The head height for the magazine and chamber, all that stuff. Okay, look at what else we make. 165 SST. We can go a little heavier than that. The 178 was just that nice 30 cal number that previously existed, but we didn't make one at the time for the hunting side. I
feel like that, the mid 170s, you have the XM118 LR military round, which is the 175 hollow point. That's kind of been the standard. A lot of us cut our teeth just shooting that, I'm going to call it junk ammo, but that bulk long range ammo, and that bullet weight became synonymous with shooting a 308 at long range. And so with Hornady, I'm not sure who decided this years ago, but some decider decided that instead of being 175, we're going to be 178. So we just kind of fell in line with that.
Right. That's kind of where the 30 cals ran with. So after we got those figured out, 7mm, got to have 7 mag support.
Of course.
162s was that projectile. It's mag length for SAMI chambers. That was, it's a twist rate thing, really. I mean, you can only, what is that, 9 1/4, 9 1/2, or
1 and 9, isn't
it?
No, it's 9 1/4 or 9 1/2.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little weird on the 7s, like 708's the same, like 9 1/2. But so that's where the 162 is at. Ogive had to be again, we're maxing out what you can fit in that package, but it's still limited to what you look at now in the PRCs and the Creedmoors and stuff, that we can stretch those ogives out. Fitting in these legacy cartridges, you just don't have that option.
Right.
So 162, again, we had the 162 bow to hollow point, and we had a 162 AMAX.
Oh, yeah, the old AMAX, a throwback.
So that's going to get retrofitted into an ELD-Match around the same time period, and, well, let's just keep it the same.
Keep it the same, sure.
The 338 Advanced Rifle Cartridge. Purposefully designed for hard-hitting subsonic performance, the 338 ARC delivers 1.5 times more energy than the 300 Blackout subsonic. Featuring the 307-grain Sub-X bullet in the subsonic line and the 175-grain hollow point in Hornady Black. The big little cartridge that packs a punch. The 338 ARC from Hornady.
So it sounds like largely on our initial offerings, you pick your target cartridge first. All right, we're going to be launching a new bullet. It has to work in these legacy cartridges with these standard twist rates. And so, yeah, you look at 30 cal, you look at 7mm, and then you look at cartridges and calibers like the 6.5. And then there's some other bullets in 7mm and 30 cal that I want to kind of transition to because they're different. They're different than, it just has to work. This head height, this muzzle velocity window, whatever. And I'm talking about 6.5 143, 7mm 175, and that 30 cal 212. Now those in the 6.5 world, there was no 6.5 popularity. There was a 6.5 by 55, and then there was a 260 had a small blip on the radar that quickly faded. But we didn't design our 143 for that stuff. Those we were able to just kind of uncork right out of the gate. But the 7mm and the 30 cal, how did those come to be? Because traditionally our upper management isn't super inclined to build bullets that are hand load only, that have no factory cartridge usability. Now, fast forward a few years after this, and we had factory cartridges to shoot these bullets, but talk to us about those specific bullets and how you landed on 212, 175, 143, which is probably the biggest one we get questions about.
Yeah, so the 30 cal 212 was actually in the works around the same time of either was initial offering or was right after that, but I can't remember. But 300 PRC wasn't even a thing yet, but I mean, we knew about it internally. It was going to be a thing.
The 300 Hornady Super Mag.
Yeah, so that 212 was based for, hey, we know this is going to be a launch in the near future. We got to have a hunting bullet for that line. That was 212, so you're going to be able to spin it up faster. You got a little bit more head height. You can put a sleeker ogive on it. We already have the 208 AMAX at the time. So, yeah, a little behind the scenes, that 212 ELD-X profile is based on 208 AMAX, i.e. 208 ELD-Match now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was a 212. And why it was 212, I can't really remember. I think it was just me and Joe kind of spitballing back and forth. We had the 208, so we had the 208 AMAX at the time. And there was other 210s on the market.
Yep.
Competitive bullets that we were trying to compete with.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well,
So,
competitors
just
compete competitively.
Push it a grain or two above a 210, and hey, 212 sounds better than.
Yeah.
Generally, the even numbered grains. Except it's 143s, but
yeah.
And
so the
212 was 300 PRC mainly driven.
Okay, and weighted to be just slightly heavier than what was kind of standard on the market back in those days, and stretch the ogive out, so ballistic efficiency increased. Obviously, the drag got better, so you're able to shoot those things at further ranges. And then you have a cartridge like the 300 PRC that had enough fuel tank to get that thing out of there.
Another thing, so like we have the 225 match bullet now. That's a lot longer, even more of a long ogive than 212s. But the reason we didn't make that 212 even longer was because that jacket's so much thicker. You start stretching that thing out. To make it heavier, it gets even longer than a thinner jacketed match bullet would be. So that, back to the twist rate, stability, being able to manufacture that jacket out of a cup, that comes into play too. And that was part of that 212. We don't want to jump in the 220 range.
Okay.
Because even at that time, that 220 was a heavy bullet.
Yeah, now we got a 250.
It's like, 250 A-tip.
Yeah.
Can we even go bigger than that? Yeah. So, yeah. That's part of that.
So the 7mm from the outside looking in, that one looks like it was just, we make 175 grain bullets. The 7 PRC wasn't a thing. 28 nozzle wasn't a thing. So people were mainly just hot rodding either 7 Ultra Mags, 7 Mags, stuff like that. So
175 felt heavy at the time for a hunting bullet. And now, then when we did the 180 ELD-Match, just to give you an idea of our mindset at the time, man, 180 is pushing it for weight in a 7mm. I mean, you kidding me? So in 2014, when we first did that 7mm 175, it's like, man, nobody needs a 175 it's like the heaviest hunting bullet you can find, right?
Yep.
Nosler was doing their AccuBound LR at 175 before us, so that was, 175's on the market. We got to have something to compete in that range, and let's make it hand load only.
Mm-hmm.
So custom chamber guys can have something there.
Sure.
That's where that 175 came from.
I like it. And then the big one, the big question, what the heck is up with 143? That's just an odd number, to say the least.
Yeah, so we had 140 match bullets in bow tall point and AMAX at the time. Again, right around those 6.5 and 7.30, that was, hey, we still got AMAX. This is ELD-X, ELD-Match came around at the same time. So at the design of all these projectiles, AMAX was what we had to base off of our legacy options. So I knew we want to make this new line a little bit heavier.
Mm-hmm.
How much heavier? Well, it's kind of arbitrary, but we didn't want to go too heavy because this is a 6.5 Creedmoor bullet at the time.
Yeah, we didn't have
6.5
PRC.
Creedmoor. PRC wasn't a thing. And even it tells you where we came at on priority lists was 6.5 was third down the list.
Yeah.
I mean, Creedmoor at the time was gaining popularity, but nowhere what it is now,
right?
4 or 5 years ago.
I think even at the time, 143 was
like
142, 140, 142, 143. That was as heavy as it got. Like I don't even think, because I know there's 144s out there now. I don't think those were available at the time.
No, well, there's the 150. There's a 156.
Right. None
But
of
those,
that,
none of that was
available at the
So
time.
yeah, the 142s being there, and that's honestly what I remember is I just wanted to make it heavier, and I picked 143. And
okay.
We could have done a 145, but something there is let's just make it a little bit weird.
Just make it weird, make it stand out. So there's
you got the head height there, and you got the twist in the chamber to do it in a Creedmoor. So you got a little bit of play. So some of that was just what we wanted to pick.
All right, there's 2 more things that I want to talk about in regard to these bullet weights. Miles, walk us through. There's some bullets, and you can cherry pick the ones you want to talk about, that are really modeled after the ELD-Match bullet, because the ELD-Match bullets are typically heavier than the ELD-X. We'll have some, and I look at like the 6.5, for example, look at the 6mm. Why would they have such a similar shape but such a different weight?
Yeah, so I think if you look at like the 147 ELD-Match and the 143 ELD-X,
yes,
externally very similar. Like you hold the two next to each other and you can confuse them very easily.
Yeah, I mean
you almost have to bust your calipers out and take
I would say you do with
note. You know,
I think it's essentially they're identical. I think it's 20 thou length difference.
Right.
I think that's what it
so
is.
ogive length, everything. So we're talking 20 thousandths of an inch on overall length. How does that equate to just that lighter bullet by 4 grains?
Yeah. So, but the match bullets traditionally have a little bit thinner jackets.
Okay.
And so we do that because it's easier to more precisely draw out a thinner uniform jacket.
Well, let's dive in there a little bit. So you say thinner. So when you're taking a bullet from a cup, like this coffee cup, and you have to draw it out 3 times as long, why is it easier to dry out that thinner jacket, and how thin are we talking about on these match bullets?
It's not dramatically different, but I'd say most match bullets you're looking somewhere in the ballpark of like 20 thousandths of an inch wall thickness.
Yeah, 20 to 30 thou.
As a general statement. Some of them are more, some are less, especially as you go down to like 22s and 17s, 204s, stuff like that.
Okay.
And then like your hunting bullets, it depends on the velocity regime very, very heavily.
Okay.
But some of those will start off very thin up at the top, and then by the time you get down to the base, they can be in the 30s, low 40s, maybe.
Okay.
Some of them, some of the big stuff, even thicker yet. So
a lot of that comes from the cup we start with for a heavier jacketed hunting bullet. You got to start with a thicker strip, thicker strip cup. So you need that in order to be able to keep your base
thick. Yep.
Right.
When
you don't need to keep your the whole jacket profile that thick, you can start with a thinner cup. So you're putting less work into the top of that jacket versus a heavier cup.
Mm.
So each draw, you're cold working that copper. It's getting harder and harder. When you start with a thinner cup, you don't have to put as much work into it to get to your end point as you would with the thicker strip.
More reshaping the base material, just moving the material skinnier and longer, not as much like thinning it down as you go.
Okay.
So when you start thicker and thin it down, every time you do that, you induce more and more chance for error to do things lopsided a little bit.
Yeah, so if it's not concentric, and I mean perfectly concentric, then the bullets are junk.
Yeah, and I think that's the other side of ELD-X that's really cool is that they are match accurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of headache and work that goes into setting up the press to draw out those jackets the way that we do to keep them match accurate as well as having the terminal performance side of things.
All right, so that explains that. So you were going on to say that although they're externally identical, minus the X being 20 thou shorter, how does that equate to just a lighter bullet?
The percentage volume of copper versus lead. And so the copper is less dense, takes up more space, and for every bit of thickness of jacket, you remove volume of lead. And the difference in density between the two, that's weight that can't fit there no more.
Right. So that's a quite simple explanation, but I think one that most of our listeners aren't aware of is that, there are several instances within our caliber offerings of ELD-X, ELD-Match, where we'll have a heavy ELD-Match bullet, and it'll weigh different than the ELD-X bullet, although they'll be nearly identical.
Right. And then, like he was saying, you run into, to correct for that, you have to make it longer, and then when you make it longer, you run into, we're already usually pushing the limits for what we're comfortable with gyroscopic and dynamic stability.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer you make that side of things weaker.
Okay.
So a lot of times that's just the compromise that you have to take. It's the same reason why CX is lighter than ELD-X, right? Like you can make it more or less the same length, but then replacing all the lead with copper makes it considerably lighter.
So how difficult is it? I'm sure we've talked about this on other podcasts. How difficult is it on the ELD-X? Now that features our interlock ring, which we've been doing since the 70s, where we essentially put I'm going to call it a barb on the jacket that is then swedged into the lead that mechanically helps lock that lead to the core. Now, the location of that interlock ring is slightly different than in, like, say, our SST bullet, but it's still in there. Now, anytime you introduce a feature to the inside of a jacket, that has to be difficult to manufacture. It can't be easy to keep accuracy. So talk us through some of the hurdles there of putting an interlock in a bullet that is supposed to be match accurate. And how do we do that?
So, how we form that interlock is, amongst us seems fairly obvious now, working with this for so long, but it's a fairly proprietary process. So I'm not going to go into depth like how we actually do that in detail, but hammering on stuff with tool steel and carbide and making copper do what you want to do is essentially what we're doing. But how thick the jacket is below and above that interlock and how much material you bring that in, how small that ID is of the interlock compared to the other sidewalls makes a big difference. So you're basically taking material from the outside of that jacket and pushing it in. And so you're essentially making a giant stress point there if you do it too far. So there's a sweet spot there where I got enough interlock where it's going to do what we want it to do, hold the core in the jacket during penetration in a game animal, but it's not going to go so far as to weaken the jacket and make a part where that wants to come apart there when we don't want it to. But how we got to where we're forming, especially the base and the interlock of those jackets, we get to got to do all these operations to this bullet to get it, feed in parts and kick out a finished bullet in our presses, our machines. So you start losing options on how you're going to form those things. You got to form boat tail and form that interlock, and we played around with different number of draws, 3, 4, 5, 6 draws at one point. How are we going to draw those jackets? Because they're getting so long compared to what we used to make and so thick. And it goes back to we decided making these match accurate bullet. We got to keep sidewall jacket run out very low. How are we going to do that? And so draw tooling iterations were plentiful at the early stages. Then how we form that interlock in the boat tail at the same time or separately comes into play. What we've learned, and I've inherited, I didn't figure this out. A lot of accuracy of projectiles comes from the base of the bullet and how that base is formed, how we're forming the boat tail, how the core is formed at the same time or in conjunction with forming the boat copper side of the jacket of the boat tail. So yeah, it was and it still is. I mean, we're learning stuff all the time, but that is a big part of getting bullets to shoot accurately, precisely, is how you form that base.
Very important. And because, again, these do have to shoot.
Hornady Backcountry Defense Ammunition. For those backcountry encounters when a reliable round can be a lifesaver. Backcountry Defense Ammunition is loaded with DGH bullets that feature a protected point that locks the bullet nose to the core, providing maximum penetration while limiting deflection. Stay at the top of the food chain with Backcountry Defense Ammunition from Hornady.
So some of the weight, it's just a way to control velocity if we make them heavy. Some of the weight is we want to make them competitive in what's existing in the market. Some of the weight is a corollary because we took our match profile shapes and took out some of the area for lead, and lead being hyperdense, the weight is what the weight is. There's got to be a terminal aspect to all of this as well, because they have to perform terminally. That's the other side of it. Not only are these match accurate, they have to perform. Do you guys use that bullet weight metric and where that lead sits against the tip to control the terminal performance, and what goes into that? Because it's got to be velocity dependent.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. Is what cartridges do you expect it to be used in? What muzzle velocity do you get out of that cartridge? And then what does that decay look like downrange, and how far does that get you? That kind of drives the upper and lower bounds that we look at for when it has to, you have to maintain integrity at the high velocity end for the cartridge that we design it for, and then it also has to expand and actually terminally do something down at the low end. So yeah, that can be a limitation. It's like, and we've I think I've said it before, but one of my favorite pastimes is going on Midway and Brownells and wherever and reading all the bad reviews of hunting bullets. Yeah, because some of the stories are I don't know, a little comical. I mean, because it's like, okay, you took a 178 30 cal and you put it in a 300 Remington Ultra Mag and shot it at 3,200 foot per second or something crazy.
And then shot a deer at 47 yards.
We designed the bullet to work out of a 308 and expected like a 200 yard impact. Well, you just beat that by 500 foot per second. Like, of course the bullet came apart, you know? So yeah, it's the world's full of compromises. So yeah, we basically outline the envelope that we want it to work for and then start working from there.
So here's a question that we get all the time. Now, we didn't get this a few years ago, but now with cartridge design where it's at, custom rifles out there, and people hand loading, and there's just more cartridges to look for, like the PRCs, for example. Now that we've got the full family, the 6.5, the 7, and the 300, what used to be heavy for caliber is now the standard. It's not, those heavy bullet weights no longer are pushing the boundaries. And so one of the questions we get a lot is, how come you guys don't make a heavier 6.5 or a heavier 7mm or a heavier 30 cal? And in some aspects, yeah, we could, but I feel like there's some misunderstanding on the consumer level that just because it's heavier doesn't mean it's better. And you have to define what that heaviness is gaining you. So if you're hung up on the word energy, well then, yeah, okay, maybe you do want a heavier bullet just for more energy, but I feel like that's a very short-sighted view, and there has to be a limit to how heavy you can make a bullet still perform in a standard twist rate, and then is it actually ballistically more efficient? That would be one of my questions for you guys.
Yeah, it's definitely a trade-off. You make it heavier, the muzzle velocity is going to suffer, right? It's going to go slower. And maybe the higher ballistic efficiency is going to retain velocity, but then it's just on a case-by-case basis. You'd really have to do the math on that if it's actually going to gain you any range or any energy downrange. If they both hit the same expansion velocity threshold at within 30, 40, 50 yards of each other.
What are you even doing?
Right.
Yeah.
And terminally, like if they hit at about the same velocity, a 143 grain bullet and a 155 grain bullet, you shoot that into gel, shoot that into an animal, do that tens of times, and to
demonstrably
to say for sure one is better than the other, I mean, it's like, that's a tough call.
Well, in the world of big game hunting, I feel like it's not as noticeable. You know, if you took a 20 grain bullet versus a 35 grain bullet on a coyote, yeah, you could probably really see the difference, or a 30 versus a 40 grain bullet.
Right.
But when you're talking shooting a deer, the difference between a 162 and a 175, even 7 millimeters, really, you'd be hard pressed to demonstrably show better penetration or more or less hydrostatic shock or really anything.
And that's just from personal, like anecdotal experience, seeing gel blocks with even like a 6 millimeter 103 and a 6.5 143. If you never showed me the bullet and just showed me the wound cavities, like it's tough to see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then same thing, like obviously if you go 6 millimeter to 30 cal, okay, there's a difference, right?
Sure.
But like, going one bump up per caliber, and you're talking 40 grains of bullet weight different, and it's like
you're kind of in the minutia.
Yeah, now it's not dramatically different.
There's some people that love to shoot the heavies just for the sake of them being heavy. I would have to think that there's some point where we could make it heavier, but that isn't necessarily going to increase the BC that much, because the bullet still has to fit, let's say in a 6.5 PRC, the bullet still has to fit at 2.955 inches overall length, and it's still got to stabilize in an 8 twist.
Right.
So you might have to make some concessions to that ogive profile to where, your bullet is heavier, but it's less efficient. There's less ogive to it.
You can make ogives more plump and blunt, and you can shorten boat tails and get rid of boat tails, and that'll get you weight, but that'll also kill your BC.
Yeah, that's something that I feel like is misunderstood. That, and then there's an even smaller subset of people that say, a big one I get this request for. I don't know if this guy ever listens to this show, but if he does, he'll know I'm talking about him. He wants an uber heavy 6 millimeter for an uber fast twist rate. I don't care what the twist rate needs to be. You guys make 120 grain or heavier 6 millimeter, and I will build a gun with a twist rate to support it. It's like, I don't know if
for hunting.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the same thing that we've seen with several other projects, like 300 Blackout in the 338 world. When you get really, really fast twist rates, it makes it harder and harder and harder. You basically have to replace more and more lead with copper to keep the bullet structurally sound for the terminal impact. But every time you do that, you lose weight. Yep. So, like, there's at some point,
it's a slide rule.
Yeah, it's all trade-offs.
Sure.
Making those super long. I mean, you go smaller and smaller, longer and bigger and bigger L over D, right? You got smaller diameter, longer jackets. Manufacturing side, that just becomes a bear.
Right. Especially the thicker they get.
Then and then in order to keep them from just ripping apart and shredding in the super fast twist rates, you got to make them really thick. And then, it becomes a very specialized process in our huge bullet plant where we do similar things everywhere. This is a whole new process. Is it worth it? Is the market there for it? All those questions come into play. Is it really worth us doing for that niche of an application?
That's a good question.
So that's the other, I mean, on our side too, like for tooling, when you start getting super long, skinny bullets that are super thick jacket, your punches are about that big around and that long. And it's just like, it looks like a spaghetti noodle going down into that jacket to try to form it. And there's limitations that come from that as well.
Sure. Well, it sounds there's a lot of kind of all-inclusive here. There's a lot of reasons that a bullet weight's picked. Some of it, somewhat arbitrary. Some of it, a simple corollary of that's what the bullet weight came out to be when we used this ogive profile and this boat tail, because we knew we liked that from the ELD-Match, and so the weight is what the weight is. And there's some of it that's put in there to be a competitive weight within the market. And there's certain weights that we simply avoid just because of manufacturing. Like you said, when you get really, really, really long bullets with small diameter, those become an increasingly more difficult bullet to manufacture as a whole. So there's a lot of things that go into picking a bullet weight and why these bullet weights are what they are. But hopefully the listener walks away understanding that the bullet weights are, there's multiple reasons that they are what they are. And we look at all of those reasons: the terminal performance, the ballistic efficiency, how the jacket's going to hold up in the twist rates, what twist rates are available, what velocities are the cartridges of today achieving. Do we need to manipulate the bullet weight to stifle them down a little bit, or do we need to lighten the bullet weights up to get the muzzle velocity up? And basically, there is multiple reasons, and you guys get paid to look at all of them. And I feel like that's another thing that maybe some of our customers don't necessarily appreciate, that we are hunters and shooters ourselves. And like, yes, we're not discrediting what they have to say about, bullet weights, for example, but we have a team that research this stuff every single day. And the bullet weights aren't chosen on accident.
Right.
So is there anything else in ELD-X bullet weight and design that you guys get questions on at the shows or when you're out using them?
Nothing's like specifically I can think of. What's on my mind I was going to mention, might as well mention it, is the 6mm bullet weight options.
Yeah.
And the reason there, maybe that'll just give them some more insight for the listener. So originally we had to do 243 Winchester.
Never heard of that one
so
either.
You're pretty limited there on head height.
Yep.
That's why.
And twist
rate's 10. So like we have flat base 95 SST, we have flat base, in the 100 grain boat tail spar point, but we want to make this basically as sleek and efficient as a 243 will allow. So, and then there's a little better boat tail on it. So right there, you're extending your projectile length. And because of the thickness of the jacket and the cavity, how all that blends together, that's going to be a longer bullet if we want to make a 100+ grain bullet in the 243. So that 10 twist cuts our legs right from under us right away. So that's why the 243 bullet is a 90 grain bullet. And the 103 was built for the 6 Creedmoor in conjunction with the 108 at the time. Because, 6 Creedmoor comes along, we need 2 bullets. The ELD offering is still in the same time window. I think 6 Creedmoor was 17 or 18.
Yeah, I think 17 maybe.
So 105 Amex is going to turn into a new version of an ELD-Match. It's 108. We use the same profile on 103 ELD-X. We have a 100 grain honey bullet. We have a 105 coming off in that match bullet window, split right in the middle at 103. That's why the 103 is what it is.
Okay.
Could have been a 102. Could have been in there. But
and even then we're talking a grain, but basically it's the 108 profile. It's going to weigh, gosh.
Yeah, a couple grains maybe you had for your window to play with, but it's pretty much limited where that had to be.
The Hornady Rapid Safe Keypad Vault offers quick, dependable access to your firearm while providing security from unauthorized users. The Rapid Safe Keypad Vault is constructed of a heavy-duty 14-gauge steel housing and thick steel lid for tamper-proof security. The included RFID watch band tag and RFID decal can be selectively programmed to open this safe and any other Rapid Safe you own. The Rapid Safe Keypad Vault from Hornady Security.
One more thing that I just thought of this. I get this question a lot. I've tried to explain it to some people, but I typically don't take this angle when explaining it. But one of the things we get questions on all the time is ELD-Match bullets for hunting. And as a general rule, we don't recommend that. There's a reason in there, though, among several, that I don't really get into, and that is how we crowd the tip with the lead and how that can manipulate that initial expansion. So talk us through what that lead crowding is to the tip and how that plays with terminal performance, and then we'll tie that into how that also dictates ELD-X bullet weight, because how much run that tip has at that lead core before it hits it on impact can change how that bullet expands. And if you have to fill some of that up with lead, then that bullet is obviously going to have more lead in it. It's going to be heavier.
When we're forming a bullet and we shove a piece of lead in there, we got to smack it with a punch to swell that lead out and fit the internal geometry of that jacket. What that punch looks like determines what the lead looks like when you put the tip in it and swedge it all up and wrap it all together. Now on match bullets, we essentially want to give that tip some room behind the lead. We want to give some room so when we swedge it up, we're not crowding it so hard that we're going to try squirting that tip out when it's final swedged. But we also don't want it to be too big where that thing it could turn into a, one, you're just eating up weight, but two, if people are going to hunt with it, we don't want it to explode like VMAX. So there's a middle ground there where, we're trying to keep this package where it is designed to be length per weight, that whole combination. And if you start replacing lead with air, you lose weight real fast.
Yeah, you do.
And vice versa.
And what's that do to terminal performance if you have more run at the core?
So Jaden's talked about this way back in the day when we first did ELD-X stuff. You need an initiation of expansion somehow, some mechanism. Tip is that for tip bullets. So if you have a lead core completely capturing that tip and it's pushed up against the shank of that tip, the part that's inside the jacket, when that impacts a medium, an animal or jello, whatever we're testing, that tip is got to overcome the resistance of whatever is behind it.
Okay.
Now, if it's like an ELD-X, it's fit perfectly to this outside of that diameter of the tip shank, and it has some runway because of the low velocity expansion criteria that we gave that bullet line.
Mm-hmm.
Now, match bullets, we're basically squeezing that thing tight. We don't really care.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a controlled variable. It wasn't
a controlled variable. You're right. Yeah. We don't go into it saying these bullets need to have this certain expansion characteristics.
Right.
We're drawing the best jacket possible. We're making them shoot as best as we possibly can.
Yeah.
So that's why we don't recommend those being used for hunting, because we didn't design them to be. There's nothing there that guarantees those are going to expand the same way every time.
Right.
Yeah. So there's tooling, geometry, and then there's QC checks put in place with the ELD-X to ensure that we get a reliable window of velocity initiation, like expansion initiation. Whereas ELDM, it's made to shoot paper and steel. And,
really, really well.
Right. So the tip and the jacket, they come together. It makes a consistent external shape. Internally, we don't test, we don't care, and you may get variable results with where that initiation, that velocity threshold.
Perfect. That's exactly the answer I was looking for. Because, again, the hunting with the ELD-Match thing, that's probably a separate podcast in and of itself. We just say, don't do it. Now, on the ELD-X side, how that lead is formed around the tip and the distance that tip has to travel to hit that lead core, that is purposefully controlled. And that's controlled for terminal performance. And because, again, like you said, Ryan, if you don't fill that up with lead, you start losing weight in a darn hurry, and vice versa. So that can also help dictate what the weight is. And that ties to the terminal performance. We get the terminal performance we want with the shape we want, and we have to manipulate that lead height and how we crowd that tip to get that uniform expansion. So that just, like I said, that was the last second thought that came to mind. But the ELD-X as a whole, I've shot matches with it. I'm not a good match shooter, but I've shot plenty of matches with it. Taken a lot of game animals with it around the world. It's still my go-to hunting bullet. As much as I love that new 160 CX, if I'm going on a hunt, my default is I'm taking the ELD-X, and then I might consider should I be taking something else? But my go-to has been that ELD-X for a long time and continues to be. And I'm excited for products in the future. You guys are always working on stuff, and I miss being part of that trust tree with the nest, but I find out about it after it's a product now. But I'm excited because in the future, new cartridges, new twist rates, new standards, and I'm excited to see what's in the future for the ELD-X bullet line, and because it's a fantastic bullet line. There is nothing else on the market that will shoot as well and perform at as many ranges consistently the same every single time. And it really has been the benchmark standard of performance when you looked about the 6.5. We talked about the 6.5 Creedmoor being, it's got to work for the 6.5 Creedmoor. The 6.5 PRC has taken the hunting world by storm. It is one of the standards. You go buy a new rifle, the average shooter goes to buy a new rifle for hunting, there's a good chance it's a 6.5 PRC. And that 143 ELD-X has really been a staple in the hunting community since its release in 2015. So well done on that one. And guys, like I said, I'm excited to see what the future of ELD-X bullets look like. New calibers, new weights, new whatever. It's going to be a fun product to continue to watch. I came into Hornady in 2013, So I was still really new when the ELD-X and ELD-Match was launched. So I've really been able to see the ELD-X go through its life here. And, I've got God willing, a bunch more years here at Hornady to continue to see that line grow and dominate and hunt with. And I hope the same for you guys as well. Anything else on ELD-X and why those darn bullet weights seem so weird?
I think we covered it pretty good. It was fun to go back and reminisce a little bit.
Yeah, right.
It was longer ago than I realized, actually, looking back at that stuff.
That's a decade.
Yeah, I mean, looked at prints this morning just to remember.
Yep.
When I first started drawing prints for those, like the first 30 cals was 2013.
Wow.
So
little whippersnapper.
Jeez.
Yeah. Barely had any facial hair. Yeah, you even shaving back then? Jeez.
Yeah.
Just kidding. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Let you get back to going to work and designing some more cool stuff.
Cool.
Guys, thanks for tuning into this episode about those ELD-X bullet weights. We tried to cover as many questions and answers as we could about why an ELD-X is the shape and the weight that it is. We hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll catch you on the next one.